Oxley. I'm the director of an organisation called Results UK, based in London. We're a member of the Action Global Health Advocacy Partnership, a global partnership of organisations that works on tuberculosis. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Plenary 2 here this morning. We've got a great set of speakers lined up, which I'm going to be introducing in a minute. But before we get going, I think I'll just maybe introduce the topic a little bit. Most of you will know that we've launched with the Stop TB partnership the new global plan to end TB. And in that, three really important targets, the 90-90-90 targets. 90% of people tested and put on treatment, 90% particularly amongst vulnerable groups, and 90% treatment success. But our first speaker is going to be talking to us about drug-resistant TB. And the numbers for drug-resistant TB are strangely both a long way away and very close to 90-90-90. If we look at the numbers, there's 480,000 estimated cases of multi-drug resistant TB every year. We're only finding 123,000 of those. Of those 123,000 that we're finding, only 111,000 are being put on treatment. Now that's more than 90%, but we really need to be getting to 100. Of those that we put on treatment, only 50% are successfully treated. So if you do the maths on all of that, we are so very, very close to not successfully treating 90% of people with multi-drug resistant TB. And that's something that I think causes us all to feel that we need to do more. Thankfully, somebody who was successfully treated, not MDR but XDR TB, is our first speaker today. And it is really a wonderful pleasure for me to introduce Phumeza Tsile. She's one of the most powerful voices of her generation, and I'm so pleased to be inviting her to the stage. Please welcome Phumeza. This button makes it go forwards.
No, Aaron. The first slide. And this one.
And this one. And this one's forward.
Okay, sorry about that. Good morning. My name is Phumeza Tsile. In 2010 here in South Africa, it was a World Cup. Well, I was not well. I was also studying at the university called Cape Peninsula University of Technology. Well, I saw that I was getting tiny. I wasn't coughing or having night sweats. So I went to a doctor to explain what was wrong with me. He tested for all common diseases, of which they all came back negative. He said then that I must go to a clinic to test for TB. I did go to a clinic and gave out my sputum test. At the time, you had to wait for 3 weeks to get results, of which the results came back and still there was no sign of TB. The doctor at the clinic suggested that I do a chest X-ray. And then from the chest X-ray, he saw that it was TB. I was started with normal TB drugs. They were like 3 tablets with small little ones. It was tolerable at the time. I took the drugs for about 3 weeks, but I wasn't getting better. Instead, I was getting more tiny. Well, I came back, and then he saw that my TB was probably resistant to 1 or 2 of the drugs. I don't know how to explain it. Doctors would know how to explain it. He called it MDR TB. I thought, well, that was the end. But then he said that there is a chance that I will be cured. MDR means multi-drug resistant TB, which means the drugs I was taking were not working on my TB that I had. That was normal TB. Well, I took the MDR drugs for about 4 months, and there were like 20 tablets a day with an injection called kanamycin. Well, one morning, I woke up and everything was so quiet. I tried to turn on the television, but there was no sign. I went to the bathroom, normal stuff flushed, there was no sound of raining water. Well, I went back to the nurse and told him that I could not hear. I saw her moving her lips, but I could not make out what she was saying. She then wrote down that I must go to the audio department to have my ears tested. Well, I went to the audiologist. Now the audiologist was talking, I could not hear. Then they had a pad and a pen. Then I had to write down. He wrote down in red that deaf. Then I must go see my doctor at the hospital. Now the conversation changed. the doctor was doing the writing and I was the one doing the talking. She wrote down that she was sorry and that there was nothing she could have done about it. And then I was probably resistant to MDR TB drugs. Then I need to move from the MDR TB ward to go to the pre-XDR TB ward. Well, I moved. I took the pre-XDR TB drugs. I thought they were different, like not the same, but they are the same, just that they add more. I took them, and then the doctor at the pre-XDR ward examined me, and she saw there was something growing in my lungs. She was not sure. She said perhaps it might be cancer or tumor. Well, she sent me to Groote Hospital to have that thing checked. It was neither cancer or tumor. It was just some liquid in my lungs. I did the surgery then, and then there were errors there. I ended up with a broken rib and a collapsed lung. Well, at least I survived. I was sent back to hospital, and from Brooklyn Church Hospital, I was discharged to continue my pre-XDR treatment at home. Well, I took them for about 4 or 5 months, and then I was told they also stopped working. So my chances of surviving were really low. I was told 2 times that I will die. Like there was no chance that I can survive. That's what the doctor said. That means they didn't have, well, 4 months later on the pre-XDR TB drugs, they also stopped working. I was told I have XDR TB, and now my chances of surviving were like really, really low. Luckily enough, I've met MSF, and they gave me a drug called linezolid. Here in South Africa, we have the problem of patent laws. The drug alone, like 1 tablet, costs about $60. That's about plus minus 700 rands here in South Africa. The people who need the drug the most can't have access to it because it is expensive. Well, with my XDR, there was one time when Dr. Jane was talking to me because even the linezolid has stopped working. She told me that she was writing, I was talking. She told me that I must go see a priest and prepare my soul because she was running out of options. The linezolid worked and then it stopped working, then it worked again. But finally in 2013, August, I was cured, 3 years and 3 months of treatment. This year, there's a thing that we called Friends of Pumeza. They managed to raise $20,000 to get bilateral cochlear implants. Well, you know, TB most affects the poor. How can we get there? How can you afford these things? Well, they helped me with $20,000. People always ask, how does the cochlear implant work? Is it like the hearing aid or not? Well, it's not. As you can see here, what happened is they cut you behind the ear, and then they put whatever they put there, and then they close again. And then you have to wait. See, I waited for 3 weeks to get healed. My audiologist wrote down there, "Hi, Pumeza, everything went very well. Good responses on all the tests. Hope you feel 100% again. Take care, Jill." And then the media was all over it. As you can see there, that's the outside of the cochlear implant. That's the thing that gets the sound. Then I'll be able to hear you. But when they are off, then I can't hear it. They must be always on. Well, in 2013, I co-authored the first drug-resistant TB manifesto with my doctor, Dr. Jenny. I delivered it at the 67th World Assembly in Geneva. We asked them for better treatment, better drugs, because now even WHO has declared TB as a public health emergency. I and the other TB survivors, we went to Parliament, that is in the United Kingdom, in the USA, and here in South Africa. We asked them to assist us with drug-resistant TB. I heard now there's a thing called a Barcelona Declaration, of which I'm not sure about the numbers. They say about 612 MPs have signed it from, I'm not sure how many countries, I'll say 97 countries. Well, here in South Africa, there's a problem of patent laws. We marched to the Medicine Control Council to ask them to register the linezolid because now the price is too expensive for people who need the drug the most. As you can see, photos there. There was a thing called pharmacate, which is people over profit. That means the drugs are expensive and people who need the drug can't have them. Well, there is a thing called TB and stigma. As you can see here, we need to unmask stigma. So now I ask you to join me in breaking down the stigma. I ask you now to put on the mask. I'll wait for you to put on the mask. Well, by putting on the mask, we are in solidarity with the patient to remind ourselves that behind the mask we are all the same. At least we have some encouraging responses from Desmond Tutu, even our own health minister, Minister Aaron Motsoaledi, even our songwriters, Yvonne Chaka, and our recent TB ambassadors. As you can see that, Judy Alson, Temi Seyate, and Masas. I'm also one of the South African TB ambassadors. Well, anyone can get TB. You might know that Nelson Mandela had TB, Desmond Tutu had TB, Tina Turner, the Pope, and that beautiful girl over there. More can be done, more should be done. We as civil society and affected communities have the power to influence decision makers. We have the power to influence how one is delivered. We have the power to influence how people see themselves and treat others. 2 billion infections, 2 billion people are infected with TB. 2 billion people could have potential solution. The world must hear our voices. Together we can and must end TB now. Thank you.
Thank you, Fumeza. I think when we work in TB, we're used to. When we work in TB, we're used to people not really knowing what we do when we tell them. I remember once I went to a party and there was a young lady there. I got chatting to her and she said, "What do you do?" I said, "Oh, I do some work on international development issues like tuberculosis." She says, "Oh, I do lots of work on tuberculosis too." I go, "Wow, that's very rare. That doesn't happen every day. You come across somebody that does work on TB." And she said, "Yeah," she says, "because we've really got to stop them from shooting all of those badgers in the English countryside." And I think, you know, we had a very interesting conversation about tuberculosis and who it affected and so on. And I think, you know, we did some research on this in the UK. Between the 20th of September 2012 and over the next 30 days, the same time that we were launching the World Global TB Report, there were 200 articles on TB in the press in humans. And over that exact same period, when we were launching the new Global TB Report, there were 500 articles in the press on TB, just in badgers. So I think, you know, we have a really interesting relationship between zoonotic TB and regular TB. And we're really blessed to have Professor Paul van Helden from Stellenbosch University and the MRC to come and talk to us about it. Thank you.
Well, I feel really humbled after that first talk. I'm sure you do too. But now I feel, I'm not entirely sure what, because am I a Badger supporter or what? I'm not quite sure. The WHO is talking about TB elimination by 2035. But there are a number of aspects to TB that have not really been very well addressed over the last few decades. One of those is zoonotic TB. So animals can get TB too, and they can pass it on to us. If we're talking about TB eradication, therefore we need to know about TB in animals, because we will not be able to eradicate TB unless we also address that problem. So we've had a very close relationship with animals for a very long time. So sometimes we love them and we are close to them, and sometimes they are our livestock and we take milk from them and we eat them. And we associate closely with them, particularly poor and rural communities in places like Africa and Asia. People are very closely associated with the animals. And whatever affects the animal can affect the human and vice versa. So zoonotic TB basically we define as TB that comes into humans from animals, and we usually refer to Mycobacterium bovis as opposed to Mycobacterium tuberculosis, which affects humans. And I'd like to try to persuade you that TB due to Mycobacterium bovis in humans is important. First of all, we really have absolutely no idea how common it is in the human population at large. It's an unknown incidence. I'll talk about that later. We know something about its epidemiology, but nothing like what we know about human TB. We know something about its pathogenesis, and perhaps we've forgotten a lot. John Blacklock published a long treatise in 1932 in the UK, where he examined, we did post-mortems on something like 230 children in Scotland. Since then, we have not learned very much about the pathogenesis of zoonotic TB in humans. And part of the problem, I think, is because many clinicians, particularly in poorer parts of the world, and I include South Africa in that category, feel that since the treatment or the disease is similar, treatment can be similar. So Mycobacterium bovis is sensitive to 3 of the 4 first-line drugs, and there lies part of the problem. So some clinicians think it's not important to differentiate between the two, and that treatment, standard treatment for TB will work. But we have a higher death rate amongst patients from M. bovis. Treatment should be longer, 9 to 12 months, probably because it's resistant to one of the first-line drugs. Costs more, of course. There's an increased risk of default, and there is intrinsic drug resistance in M. bovis, which I will get back to. Now, lest we all think that this happens in poor, rural, pastoral communities, not so. In 2001 to 4, there was a huge outbreak of M. bovis right in New York City. And you would think, since when do we have cows in New York City? Well, you don't. But of course, you import products which people eat. And this came from illegal importation of soft cheeses from Mexico that came from cows where milk was not pasteurized and where the animals had M. bovis. So it can happen to you anywhere. So let's try to get a handle on how much zoonotic TB there is. And we published this paper in 2013 looking at many nations, and these are just European nations. And although it may not be all that clear, you will see that the results of various studies estimate that maybe in some countries there's a possibility that 25% of TB could be due to zoonotic TB or M. bovis from animals, although in general it's quite low. So we think that we can make remarks about how much there may be overall on average, and I'll get back to that. But this, I think, is very interesting. So if you look at this slide, it tells you about how much zoonotic TB there is versus ordinary TB. And if you look at the fourth line that I show on this graph, you will see that that's the WHO region of the Americas. And you will see MTB, which is the lower thing, is very low, whereas the proportion of zoonotic TB there is extremely high. This kind of seems counterintuitive, but not really. We've got a very good handle on human TB in the Americas and a very poor handle on bovine TB. And I think you would see the same in the UK, you'd see the same in Ireland. These are wealthy, developed nations where we know what we're doing, we know what we've got. We don't know what we're doing, and we don't know what we've got in most other countries of the world. And I think part of the problem is that there's generally been a lack of awareness of zoonotic TB amongst those people involved with human TB. The veterinarians, of course, have been aware of this problem for a long time. For them, it's a notifiable disease, a disease that needs action and drastic action. So we can estimate that perhaps 1.4% of human TB cases can be due to M. bovis. And this is a little bit of a wild guess based on small number of biased studies. Remember that we think that because this is under-investigated and under-researched, it's probably more than that. But even so, if it's 1.4%, then we can estimate 126,000 cases per annum in the world. Eradication can't happen unless we deal with that 126,000. And I hear that the WHO put out a report yesterday, and their estimate was 121,000 cases. So we're pretty clear that we are in rough agreement with this, even though we all agree that it's an underestimate. Now, a lot of people think that bovine TB in humans is extrapulmonary. And this graph tends, this figure tends to show that that is the case. So more extrapulmonary TB in humans from M. bovis than MTB, but not solely. So you cannot assume that if someone has extrapulmonary TB, it is from bovis. It could be from MTB too. But this, of course, makes things more difficult to diagnose. EPTB is not that easy to diagnose, and we can easily miss it. And so treatment for TB, when it's extrapulmonary, could be wrong in so many cases. Also, maybe harder to cure EPTB. And this is something that we need to look at. Possibly this is also something useful for doing surveillance. But where does this come from? That information comes from only these countries that are highlighted. This, you can see, is an extremely small number of countries in the world where this has been looked at. The rest of the world has not been investigated. This is a huge gap in our knowledge of this disease. I'd like to just refer you just for one moment to our neighboring country, beautiful country of Mozambique. And I had a student who will graduate PhD in about a week's time, and she did some incredibly arduous work in Mozambique. So she looked at many different cattle herds through the country, and this is an example of a figure from her thesis, and you can see that the incidence of bovine TB in these cattle herds is extremely high. The chances, therefore, that this is passing on to humans in those rural pastoral areas are extremely high. And we have started to do some work, and we have now picked up our first zoonotic TB case close to one of these herds. So I have no doubt that there's a lot more. But let's move on to something rather more complicated. I was asked to talk about zoonotic TB and drug resistance, and we know almost nothing about this. So what do we know? We do know that there's different susceptibility to drugs in BCG. What is BCG? For those of you who don't know, it's actually an attenuated strain of Mycobacterium bovis that we use for vaccine. So it's not pathogenic in most cases. So why should we worry about variable drug resistance? Well, people who are immunosuppressed, or children who are immunosuppressed and get vaccinated, can develop BCGiosis, and therefore need to be treated as if they had TB. So you could have HIV, you could have primary immunodeficiency disorders, and you can develop BCGiosis. We need to know how to treat that. So there's variability in drug sensitivity in various BCG strains. All Mycobacterium bovis is resistant to pyrazinamide. It hasn't acquired it. It's innate in its genome. So there you have a problem, one of the 4 first-line drugs. And we know that additional resistance has been picked up in a number of zoonotic cases, for example, reported in Scotland and Ireland. So we know, therefore, that there's a risk. And we know from human TB treatment that there's always a risk of acquisition of drug resistance. So you know that this current standard TB therapy is 2 months on 4 antibiotics, including pyrazinamide, followed by 4 months on 2 antibiotics. That's for drug-sensitive TB. We won't go into drug resistance just for the moment. Therefore, if we have a case of bovis, we already have resistance to 1 drug. If we acquire resistance to just 1 more drug, we effectively have MDR TB. We call it multi-drug resistant TB. So there's a grave risk for people who have zoonotic TB. Now what happens? What do we know happens in human TB caused by M. tuberculosis if there is drug resistance? So in the past, it was assumed that resistance to 2 of the first-line drugs, namely ethambutol and pyrazinamide, was very low. Therefore, if someone had MDR TB, because we generally didn't test for any others in the years in the past, we can still carry on using those 2 drugs. But what would be the consequence of failure to diagnose resistance in those? Generally, patients were kept on those drugs and 1 or 2 more added. But if someone was resistant to those, further acquisition of resistance would happen and transmission of that drug-resistant TB would happen. So we found in South Africa that there was about 10-fold higher resistance to these drugs than we had previously realized. So the risk of acquisition of more resistance is incredibly high. And we advocated then that there was a need for diagnostics of all drugs and policy changes. And I'm pleased to tell you that this has been happening quite nicely. But this is really what happens. So you can get a cluster of MDR. And we looked at this cluster of MDR strains. It was 49 people with MDR, and we investigated them in great detail. So clearly what happened was probably there was transmission of isoniazid-resistant TB. And then, because treatment wasn't adequate, there was gradual acquisition, and that's moving across to the right-hand part of the slide, gradual acquisition of more and more, or resistance to more and more drugs until you have XDR. So what we're looking at here is transmission of MDR followed by individual acquisition of resistance in individual people. So we should not assume that drug resistance means loss of virulence, loss of transmitting ability. This can happen with zoonotic TB, and we are starting to see it in Scotland and Ireland, for example. So what about the treatment of M. bovis? We know that the death rate of patients suffering from M. bovis can be higher, particularly in the case of HIV positivity. Now, what happens when you've got rural communities with HIV, when treatment is more problematic? This is a grave risk to these individuals. People with bovis are 2.6 times more likely to pass away than people with MTB. So we are left really with a number of major challenges, even though this might be a small component of the greater TB epidemic. First of all, there's no systematic surveillance in any country for M. bovis as a causal agent. There are some countries, highly developed, wealthy countries, where diagnostics is done in depth and M. bovis is probably going to be diagnosed. But most nations of the world, including my own, do not test to see whether the causative organism is M. bovis or not, unless a clinician suspects something and specifically requests it. So we have a problem with diagnosis. We have a problem with rural communities in close association with cattle, often poorer communities that really do need extra care and extra looking at. And really, it's the inability of most common diagnostics to be able to differentiate between these two organisms, coupled with, I think, a lack of realization of so many people. So I've spoken to a number of people in different countries in diagnostic laboratories, and this is the comment that I have heard from more than one. We do not test for Mycobacterium bovis because we don't have any. It's a circular argument. Obviously, if you don't test for it, you won't find it, therefore you don't have any, therefore you don't test, therefore, you can see where I'm going with this. It's quite clear. It is not that difficult to differentiate with modern tools that we have. And I really do believe that a lot more effort needs to be put into zoonotic TB. And underneath the Stop Stigma t-shirt, I'm wearing my animal t-shirt. I'll show you my chest later for those of you who are really interested. So we need to invest in wildlife. Why? Because wildlife in South Africa, in Zambia, in Tanzania, in Kenya, in Uganda, carries M. bovis. The buffalo, for example, classic carrier of M. bovis. They can mix with livestock of pastoralists. Those people are poor. Their knowledge of TB is poor. Healthcare for them is not always easily accessible. We are not going to stop TB until we address this problem right across the board. So I'm advocating a One Health policy. Wildlife, livestock, humans, we're all in it together, and we all need to work together to stop this problem. Thank you very much.
So we have a really inspiring last speaker about to join us on the stage. I think what's really important in understanding the problems that we're facing in the world of TB, and we've just seen two or even three really big ones laid out before us, is that all of these problems have solutions. But all of those solutions rely on people and rely on being able to reach out to patients. I think what's interesting is that patients aren't patients, first of all. Patients are people, first of all. And maybe they're mothers, second, husbands and wives, third, family members. To get to patients, you probably have to go quite a long way down the list. And I think it's really important that we remember that all of these people are part of communities, and communities are absolutely going to be necessary in solving all of the problems around stigma, around research and development, around zoonotic TB that we've heard so far this morning. So it's my real pleasure to welcome from KwaZulu-Natal the Reverend Nicholas Bingu, who's going to be talking with us about that.
Sanibonani, I greet you all. If I was in the church, I was going to say, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, but you will forgive me. I would like to start by thanking Professor Stacy, Stender, and Dr. Jose Luis Castro from the Union for affording me such a wonderful opportunity. You see, from the grassroots, I'm coming from the community. And also thank you also to Aaron and Stacy for sharing this session. You will notice that I don't have slides. It is because I want to talk to you, to you as people, not as conference goers. I want to start a conversation that I hope will continue outside of this chamber. I first want to tell you about a friend of mine. Her name is Nombuso Ndlovu. Nombuso Ndlovu comes to visit me in Kaluza, where I'm staying. Kaluza is a closed-net community in the KwaZulu-Natal province of South Africa. When Nombuso comes to me, she's greeted by many in my community. In the streets, who know and recognize her. She smiles at them and greets them in my language, because that is very important. She smiles using isiZulu as my mother language. Nombuso is humble and comes dressed in a modest skirt and blouse. A group of us come to meet her at the local community center. She speaks softly with my community and listens intently to them. Nombuso has been accepted in my community as a researcher. Contrast this with Cape Town as I have arrived on Wednesday. I arrived here in this conference. I was taken to a fancy hotel. Oh, and I was amazed by the beautiful conference center we are meeting. This is not my first time visiting Cape Town. I've come here before church conferences in Gugulethu. But this visit has been quite different. I expected to see my friend Nombuso at the conference, but the Nombuso I know was not there. She was transformed. She was wearing pants and a suit jacket. Oh, but she came to me, smiling. She greeted me. Oh, Nombuso. Are you the Nombuso I know? You see, Nombuso is called Jody outside of my community, and she works in research. I would have never recognized her if she hadn't come up to me to say hello. I did not realize the scale of the event that was about to take place as I'm standing here. Our South African Health Minister gave the opening lecture on Thursday night. Union members traveled here from all over the globe. And here I am, a reverend from a small church in Kaluz, also invited to share the stage at the Union World Conference on Lung Health. This, to me, symbolizes a change in thinking in TB. Definitely. You will agree with me. To my community, Nombuso is unique. I've never known a researcher to visit. If they do come, maybe they go to our local clinics or to the district health office. We don't know their names. We don't know what they do. You see, they are easy harmony in my language. Strangers to us. And it is hard to trust, you see, what we don't know. But Nombuso is different to us. With the help of Stembile Ndlovu, who is also here, a local community member, she reached out to us regular members of the community a few years ago. She comes to us for meetings. I think you will underline all these, statements I'm making. She eats our food and shows interest in our language. She even visits our homes. She can tell her the strength of our community because she is not here to point out what is wrong. She talks with us, not at us. She doesn't treat us like subjects to research or poor people to pity. She didn't talk down to us, but explain TB concepts so that we understand as local people. We are not scientists, you see. We don't know about scientific, concepts. But she takes her time explaining to us. It may not find something that cures TB, but it may help us engage with clinic workers to find out more about what is offered to fight TB and how it may help or harm us. My friends, this is what we Africans call Ubuntu. Ubuntu means inclusion or unity of the people. Our great president, Dr. Nelson Mandela, popularized this concept to the world. And his compassion for unity and forgiveness in South Africa is the reason for his great legacy. Ubuntu means I consider more than just what is best for me or my family in every decision I take, because the community is just as much as part of me as my heart or my lungs. In Zulu, we have a saying, umuntu ngumuntu ngabanye abantu. A person is a person through other people. Through Stembele Nombuso, I have learned that many researchers study TB and HIV because they care for our people who are disproportionately affected by their wrath. And I'm sure many of you here in this chamber are amongst those good Samaritans. But for us to know you as an extension of us, I want to tell you, I want to stress this. We must know you face to face. That is what I'm asking. We must know you, understand us as more than just numbers on a page. We must know that you don't pity us, but you understand us. That is very important. One of my first experience of research in Kaluza, where I'm coming from, was in the early days of ARVs testing. Clinic workers were enrolling HIV patients on a new drug that they were told could save lives. One woman who chose to participate in the study died whilst on the treatment. There was a lot of grief in my community, including me. It was painful, and a lot of talk as well. You see, no one from the study sent condolences or came to meet the family of the deceased. No one from the study attended funeral and shared in the sorrow that we felt. To the researchers, she was an adverse event to report. To us, she gave her life to the study in the hope of helping others in her wake. After that experience, few people enrolled in the study because our trust was broken. Even if it was not the test drug that killed our sister, it sure seemed like something secretive was happening to her. Ubuntu can be applied also to research, to remedy such situations. It is not Ubuntu, my brothers and sisters, my honorable guests. It is not Ubuntu to research us from afar. Come to us, get to know us. We love you. We know that your life is upon your hands. You would be surprised at how much we can teach you, and take the time to enjoy our hospitality. We are sure to welcome you to community activities and festivals with open arms. If you are interested in us, we know your intentions are in the right place. It is not also Ubuntu to focus community engagement efforts on only literate and English-speaking members of communities, because they may be easily communicate with you. Involving those who are better educated creates a level of abstraction from the people who really understand the challenges of poverty and disease. It may take more time to explain basic concepts, but a lack of education does not equal a lack of life experience. I think you'll agree with me in this point. Using an interpreter and explain in plain language, maybe it might be difficult because, especially in South Africa, where it's got many languages. But using plain language, simple English, can help bridge the gap quickly and will help the community to share your research findings. It is also not Ubuntu to exclude children or the pregnant women from your research. Yes, these participants may require more paperwork and effort to include, but they are also ones who can teach you the most. Through my involvement as a member on my community advisory team for Nombuso's research on IPT effectiveness, I have learned that a lot is changing in research. Community engagement has become more of a focus, and community advisory boards, as I was involved in it, are more common, especially in clinical trials. Nonetheless, I, as an ordinary citizen of my country, do not know of other projects like Nombuso's. Perhaps they are coming to us in the future, or perhaps too many researchers still expect the community to come to them. But I don't think after this conference they will think like that. What I do know is that we have learned a lot in Kaluza, and I have shared what I learned with my congregation and friends. And Nombuso has assured me that she has also learned so much, which I'm so grateful. If there are researchers in this audience, brothers and sisters, who think principles of community-based research do not apply to their studies, I would like to encourage you guys to think again. Without us, you would not have participants in your studies. And without you, we would not have the research to show that TB can be beaten. Umuntu ngumuntu ngabanye abantu. Ngiyabonga. Thank you.
So we've had 3 inspiring speakers. We started off with very big global numbers, hundreds of thousands of cases of drug-resistant TB every year. We went through looking at the neglected of the neglected in terms of zoonotic tuberculosis and our real lack of understanding or focus on that aspect of this disease. And then really we've had a really rousing presentation about how we need to make sure that communities are absolutely central and part of the response in research and indeed in reaching out and treating TB. So I just want to, if you could join me in giving a final round of applause to our 3 speakers. Thank you. It's now my real pleasure to introduce Paula Fujiwara. She's going to be presenting some union awards, and Paula is the scientific director of the union. Paula.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. I think in light of what we just heard, it's very timely that what we're going to do in the next few minutes. It's really a highlight and a delight of this conference to be able to celebrate and recognize individuals who have made an outstanding contribution to tuberculosis control and lung health. And today we are awarding 2 union awards. And the first is the Union Young Investigator Prize that acknowledges a researcher for work in lung health published in the last 5 years, and the person has to be younger than 35 years. So Dr. Jason Andrews is our winner. He's an infectious disease physician and epidemiologist. He received his undergraduate and medical degrees at Yale, trained at the University of California in San Francisco and Harvard, and is now an assistant professor of medicine at Stanford University in California. And his research focuses on understanding transmission dynamics of tuberculosis in high-burden settings, and current projects include examining drivers of tuberculosis in South African townships and also in Brazilian prisons. He has done highly innovative work on the epidemiology of tuberculosis in high-burden settings. He's been eager to ask fundamental and difficult questions about the transmission of tuberculosis and to bring innovative and sophisticated methods to bear upon these problems. So I'd like you to join with me to welcome Dr. Andrews to the stage to receive the Union Young Investigator Prize. Our second award is the Union Scientific Prize that acknowledges researchers at any stage of their career for work on tuberculosis or lung health published in the last 5 years. And the award winner is Dr. Helen Cox, who is an epidemiologist obviously very well known here, specializing in tuberculosis and currently working within the University of Cape Town. She's worked in tuberculosis and drug-resistant TB since 2001 and was instrumental in the establishment of one of the first drug-resistant TB treatment programs in Central Asia with MSF. And since 2008, she's been involved in operational research in Khayelitsha, a Cape Town township with a high burden of drug-resistant tuberculosis. There is no question that her work has led to international recognition as an opinion leader in the field of drug-resistant TB. Her continuing work assessing the molecular epidemiology of drug-resistant tuberculosis in Khayelitsha and assessing the impact of new diagnostics and new treatments for drug-resistant tuberculosis will continue to contribute substantially to the evidence base in this field. So it gives me great pleasure to invite Dr. Helen Cox to the stage to receive the Union Scientific Prize. So I think with that, that concludes our second plenary session of this conference, and we wish you a good day and to enjoy the rest of the sessions that are about to occur. Thank you.